The form that a person's fylgja took was believed to reflect the character and destiny of the individual, and powerful, aggressive individuals were often said to have fylgja in the form of wolves or bears, while wise, perceptive individuals might have fylgja in the form of ravens or eagles. The fylgja was not exactly a pet or a companion in the ordinary sense, but was rather an extension of the person's own spiritual essence, an external manifestation of their inner nature that existed in the liminal space between the material world and the spirit world. The concept of the fylgja is attested in numerous saga sources and appears to have been a widespread and deeply held belief throughout the Norse world, one that survived the conversion to Christianity in various attenuated forms, including the folk beliefs about animal spirits and guardian animals that persisted in Scandinavian rural communities well into the modern era. The fylgja tradition provides a crucial link between the grand mythological narratives of wolves and ravens at the cosmic level and the personal, individual experience of these animals at the level of everyday Norse life. If your fylgja was a wolf, then the wolf was not merely a symbol or a distant mythological figure, but a part of your own identity, a spiritual companion that walked with you through the world and that reflected your deepest nature back to you in animal form. This belief system created a framework in which the Norse relationship with wolves and ravens was not merely cultural or religious, but personal, intimate, and deeply individual, a relationship that was experienced not just in temples and on battlefields, but in dreams, in visions, in the quiet moments of introspection when a person confronted the question of who they really were and what forces shaped their destiny. The wolf that howled in the night was not just a wild animal and not just a mythological symbol. It might be your fylgja, your own wolf nature calling to you from the spirit world, reminding you of the wildness and the power and the danger that lay at the core of your being. The interplay between wolves, ravens, and the concept of fate in Norse culture deserves particular attention because it reveals one of the most distinctive and most philosophically profound aspects of Viking spirituality. The Norse believed in a form of fate that was at once absolute and ambiguous, a fate that was woven by three supernatural female figures known as the Nornir, the Norn, who sat at the base of Yggdrasil beside the well of Uther and who spun the threads of destiny for every living being, gods and mortals alike. The Norns were named Earth, Fathundi, and Skald, names that are often translated as past, present, and future, though these translations are somewhat misleading, as the Norse concept of fate did not map neatly onto a linear model of time, but was instead a more complex and more cyclical understanding of how events unfolded and how the actions of the past shaped the possibilities of the present and in the future. Within this fatalistic framework, wolves and ravens served as agents of fate, creatures whose actions in the mythological narratives and whose behavior in the observable natural world were understood as expressions of the fate that the Norns had woven. The ravens that circled above a battlefield were not merely scavenging for food. They were enacting a pattern that had been determined before the battle began, selecting the warriors who were fated to die and carrying news of their deaths to Odin, who would then assign them their places in Valhalla or consign them to the cold halls of hell. The wolves that devoured the bodies of the fallen were not merely satisfying their hunger, they were fulfilling their role in the cosmic order, returning the flesh of the dead to the earth and completing the cycle of destruction and renewal that the Norse believed governed all things. This fatalistic understanding of the role of wolves and ravens in the cosmic order gives the Norse relationship with these animals a quality of profound ambivalence that is difficult for the modern mind to fully appreciate. The Norse did not love wolves and ravens in the simple, sentimental way that modern people might love their pets or admire charismatic wildlife, nor did they fear them in the simple, instinctive way that a farmer might fear a predator that threatens his livestock. Their relationship with these animals was something deeper and more complex. A relationship rooted in the recognition that wolves and ravens were manifestations of forces that were simultaneously necessary and destructive, the forces that sustained the cosmic order even as they worked to destroy it. The ravens that served Odin also fed on the dead. The wolves that sat at Odin's feet also embodied the hunger that would eventually devour him. The animals were, in the fullest and most paradoxical sense, sacred, not because they were good or because they were evil, but because they were powerful, because they were real, because they embodied truths about the nature of existence that could not be denied or avoided, only accepted and honored. This acceptance of the paradoxical nature of sacred power, this willingness to honor creatures that were simultaneously beautiful and terrible, simultaneously protective and destructive, is one of the most distinctive features of Norse spirituality, and one of the features that most clearly distinguishes it from the monotheistic traditions that eventually replaced it. In the Christian framework that came to dominate Scandinavia after the conversion, the sacred was identified with the good, with the divine, with the forces of light and order, and the dangerous, the destructive, the wild were identified with evil, with the demonic, with the forces of darkness that opposed God's will. This binary framework left little room for the kind of sacred ambivalence that characterized the Norse relationship with wolves and ravens, and the conversion to Christianity, therefore, represented not just a change in theological beliefs, but a fundamental restructuring of the way Scandinavian peoples understood the relationship between power, danger, and the divine. Under the old system, a wolf could be both Odin's companion and the world's destroyer, and both of these roles were understood as expressions of sacred power. Under the new system, the wolf's destructive qualities were assigned to the category of evil, and its sacred status was revoked, leaving behind only the fear and the hostility that the Christian tradition associated with the wolf as a symbol of Satan and sin. The consequences of this spiritual transformation were profound and far-reaching, extending well beyond the realm of religious belief and into the practical domain of human-animal relations. In the centuries following the conversion, Scandinavian attitudes toward wolves shifted dramatically, moving from the complex, ambivalent reverence of the pagan period to the systematic hostility of the Christian era, a hostility that manifested in organized wolf-hunting campaigns, bounty systems, and eventually the complete extermination of wolf populations across much of Scandinavia. The wolf, once sacred, became vermin, a creature to be destroyed rather than honored, and the cultural memory of its former spiritual significance faded, surviving only in fragments of folklore, in the old names that parents still gave their children, and in the literary texts that preserved the ancient myths for audiences who no longer fully understood or believed in them. The raven fared somewhat better, partly because it was less of a direct threat to human economic interests, and partly because its intelligence and adaptability allowed it to thrive in human-altered landscapes in ways that the wolf could not. But the raven too lost its sacred status in the Christian era, becoming an ordinary bird rather than a divine messenger, a creature of superstition rather than a creature of worship. And yet, even in the modern world, even in societies that have been Christian for 1,000 years and secular for much of the last century, the old associations have not entirely disappeared. The wolf and the raven continue to occupy a special place in Scandinavian cultural consciousness, a place that cannot be fully explained by their ecological roles or their aesthetic appeal, but that seems to reach back to something older and deeper, something that was laid down in the cultural substrate during the centuries, when these animals were understood as living bridges between the human world and the divine. The modern Scandinavian fascination with wolves, which has manifested in passionate debates over wolf reintroduction and conservation policies that are far more emotionally charged than the ecological facts alone would seem to warrant, suggests that the wolf continues to serve as a symbolic lightning rod for deeper anxieties about the relationship between civilization and wilderness, between control and chaos, between the tame and the wild, anxieties that are remarkably similar in structure, if not in content, to the anxieties that the Norse expressed through their mythology of Fenrir and the binding of the cosmic wolf. Similarly, the raven remains a potent cultural symbol in Scandinavia and across the broader Norse diaspora, appearing in flags, in coats of arms, in the names of businesses and sports teams and cultural organizations, and in the ongoing creative engagement with Norse mythology that has produced a vast body of modern literature, art, film, and music inspired by the old stories. The enduring power of the wolf and the raven as symbols in post-Viking Scandinavian culture points to something fundamental about the nature of the human relationship with the animal world, something that the Norse understood with a clarity and a depth that modern societies, with their sharp separation between nature and culture, between the animal and the human, between the sacred and the profane, have largely lost. The Norse lived in a world in which the boundary between human and animal was permeable, in which a person could become a wolf and a raven could carry the thoughts of a god, in which the natural world was not a collection of resources to be exploited, or a backdrop against which human dramas were played out, but was instead a living, conscious, spiritually charged reality in which every creature had a role to play in the great cosmic drama that was unfolding from the moment of creation to the inevitable cataclysm of Ragnarok. This understanding of the natural world as sacred, as imbued with meaning and power and purpose, was not unique to the Norse. It appears in various forms in indigenous and traditional cultures around the world. But the Norse expression of it, with its extraordinary, literary, and artistic sophistication, its psychological depth, its willingness to confront the darkest and most terrifying implications of a universe in which sacred power and destructive force were one and the same, remains one of the most powerful and most compelling visions of the human-animal relationship that any civilization has ever produced. To understand why the Vikings kept wolves and ravens as sacred companions, then, is to understand something far more than a curious detail of medieval Scandinavian culture. It is to understand a worldview, a way of being in the world that was fundamentally different from our own, a way of being that recognized the wolf not merely as a predator, but as a manifestation of cosmic forces that were simultaneously creative and destructive, a way of being that saw in the raven not merely a clever bird, but a divine messenger whose flight connected the world of mortals to the world of gods. The terrifying spiritual truth that lies at the heart of this relationship is not that the Vikings worshipped dangerous animals out of superstitious fear or primitive ignorance. The terrifying truth is that they understood something about the nature of reality that modern civilization has largely chosen to forget. The truth that the forces which sustain life and the forces which destroy it are not separate, not opposed, not distinguishable from one another, but are aspects of a single, indivisible power that runs through all things, a power that the Norse saw most clearly embodied in the yellow eyes of the wolf and the black wings of the raven. The story of how wolves and ravens were experienced not just as mythological abstractions, but as living, breathing presences in the daily lives of Norse people, requires us to spend some time in the physical landscape of Scandinavia itself. Because the geography and ecology of the Norse homeland shaped the spiritual imagination of its inhabitants in ways that are absolutely inseparable from the mythology and the ritual practices that emerged from that landscape. Scandinavia is a place of extraordinary and often brutal natural beauty, a land of deep fjords carved by ancient glaciers, of pine and birch forests that stretch for hundreds of miles without interruption, of mountains that retain their snow well into the spring months, and whose summits are often lost in clouds that seem to descend from another world entirely. In the Viking Age, this landscape was far wilder and far less human-modified than it is today. The forests were denser, the rivers more unpredictable, the coastlines more exposed to the full fury of North Atlantic storms, and the wildlife more abundant and more dangerous. The wolf population of Scandinavia in the Viking Age was almost certainly far larger than it is today, when a tiny and intensely monitored population of perhaps a few hundred wolves survives in the border regions of Sweden and Norway. In the 9th and 10th centuries, wolves would have been a constant feature of the Scandinavian environment, present in every forest, audible on almost every winter night, visible at the edges of every settlement when hunger drove them close to human habitation in search of livestock or refuse. Similarly, ravens, which are among the most habitat adaptable of all birds, and which thrive in the kind of mixed forest and open country landscape that characterized Viking Age Scandinavia, would have been a ubiquitous presence, their deep, resonant calls echoing across fjords and hillsides throughout the year, their large black shapes visible in the bare winter trees, or wheeling in loose aggregations above any spot where food was available. Living in such close and constant proximity to wolves and ravens, the Norse developed an intimate and detailed knowledge of their behavior, a knowledge that was practical and observational in its origins, but that was continuously being interpreted and enriched by the mythological framework that gave all natural phenomena their spiritual significance. Norse farmers and hunters understood the social structure of wolf packs, the hierarchy of the alpha pair and their offspring, the way younger wolves deferred to older and more experienced animals, the way packs defended their territories against rival packs, the way individual wolves that failed to find mates or that were expelled from their packs roamed alone as solitary hunters, more desperate and more dangerous than their pack-living counterparts. This understanding of wolf social organization, derived from years of observation in the field, fed directly into the mythological and cultural elaborations of wolf symbolism, providing an empirical foundation for the metaphorical uses to which wolves were put in poetry, lore, and narrative. The lone wolf, the Varg, was a figure that the Norse understood from direct experience as well as from mythology, a creature whose isolation made it not merely dangerous, but pitiable, a being that had lost the social bonds that gave life meaning, and that was condemned to wander the margins of the world in a state of permanent exile. The parallels with the human outlaw were not imposed from outside onto an indifferent natural reality, but were perceived as genuine structural similarities between the social life of wolves and the social life of humans. Similarities that confirmed the Norse belief that the patterns of the divine world were reflected throughout all levels of creation. Ravens, too, were observed with extraordinary care and precision by the Norse, who had abundant opportunity to study these highly intelligent and behaviorally complex birds in their natural environment. The raven's intelligence, which modern science has confirmed to be remarkable, even by the standards of the corvid family, which already includes some of the most cognitively sophisticated non-human animals known to science, must have been immediately and strikingly apparent to anyone who spent significant time in their company. Ravens solve complex problems, use tools, plan for the future, recognize individual human faces, communicate with sophisticated vocalizations, play, and form long-term pair bonds with their mates. They also engage in behaviors that, to a human observer, can appear almost uncannily purposeful and meaningful, behaviors such as following hunters and predators to take advantage of their kills, a strategy that requires the raven to understand something about the hunting behavior of other species and to position itself accordingly, or engaging in elaborate aerial displays and games that seem to serve no immediate survival purpose, but that appear to be performed for their own sake, for something that, in a human being, we would not hesitate to call joy. For the Norse, who were primed by their mythological framework to see in ravens the eyes of Odin, the external expression of divine thought and memory, these behaviors would have been interpreted not as evidence of mere animal intelligence, but as confirmation of the raven's supernatural nature, its participation in a level of consciousness and intentionality that went beyond the ordinary animal and approached the divine. The relationship between Norse people and individual ravens would sometimes have been quite intimate, because ravens, unlike most wild birds, can be tamed to a remarkable degree and will, if raised from chicks in human company, become remarkably sociable and interactive with their human companions. There is no direct evidence from the Viking age of tame ravens being kept in the way that we might keep pet birds today, but the mythological tradition of Hugin and Munin, ravens who sat on Odin's shoulders and flew out at his command and returned to whisper in his ears, suggests a familiarity with the behavior of tame ravens that could only have come from direct experience. A tame raven will indeed perch on a human's shoulder, will indeed make sounds that seem almost like speech, will indeed demonstrate an uncanny attentiveness to human behavior and emotion that can feel, to those who have experienced it, like something very close to genuine communication. The Norse, who observed this behavior in tame ravens and who experienced the extraordinary intelligence and personality of individual ravens with whom they had developed a relationship, would have had every reason to believe that these birds were something more than ordinary animals, that they participated in a form of consciousness that was not entirely alien to their own, that they were, as the mythology insisted, creatures in whom the divine and the natural were indistinguishably merged. The intersection of direct natural observation and mythological interpretation in the Norse understanding of wolves and ravens is perhaps most vividly illustrated in the phenomenon of cooperative hunting between ravens and wolves, a behavior that has been documented by modern wildlife biologists, and that would have been well known to Norse people who spent time in the Scandinavian wilderness. Ravens and wolves are frequent companions in the northern boreal forest ecosystem, and their relationship is one of the most remarkable examples of interspecies cooperation in the natural world. Ravens will follow wolf packs and alert them to the presence of prey, flying ahead to scout and then returning to lead the wolves toward caribou or elk or moose that the ravens have located from the air. In return, the wolves provide the ravens with access to carcasses that the birds could not open on their own, since their beaks are not strong enough to penetrate the thick hide of large ungulates, but can easily access the soft tissue of an animal once a wolf pack has made an opening. This mutually beneficial relationship, in which the raven's superior aerial vision and the wolf's superior physical strength complement each other perfectly, creating a hunting partnership that is more effective than either species could achieve alone, would have been observable to any Norse hunter who spent significant time in the forest, and its implications within the mythological framework of Odin's wolves and ravens would have been profound. For a Norse person who already believed that Odin's ravens and Odin's wolves were different aspects of the same divine intelligence, different manifestations of the same cosmic will, to observe actual ravens and actual wolves working together in the forest would have been a revelation, a confirmation that the mythological truth they had learned from stories and rituals were not mere narratives, but were accurate descriptions of the actual structure of the natural world. The cooperation of ravens and wolves in the hunt was, from a Norse perspective, not a biological phenomenon that happened to resemble a mythological pattern, but was the mythological pattern made visible in the material world, the truth of the myth expressing itself through the behavior of real animals in a real landscape. This kind of correspondence between myth and nature, between the stories told about the gods and the observable behavior of the world, was one of the most powerful sources of religious conviction in Norse culture, a source of what we might call empirical confirmation for beliefs that were, in their origins, theological and narrative rather than scientific. The Viking who went into the forest and watched a raven lead a wolf pack to a kill was not merely observing an interesting ecological phenomenon. He was witnessing the divine working itself out in the world, watching Odin's thought and Odin's hunger, acting in concert to bring death to the prey and sustenance to the killers. And this experience would have reinforced his religious beliefs with a power and an immediacy that no amount of abstract theological argument could have provided. The role of wolves and ravens in Norse shamanic practice, a dimension of Viking spirituality that has only relatively recently begun to receive the serious scholarly attention it deserves, adds yet another layer of complexity to the story of the Viking relationship with these animals. The practice of Scyther, which was the primary form of shamanic magic in Norse culture, involved the practitioner entering a trance state in which they were believed to travel through the spirit world, to communicate with supernatural beings, to discover hidden knowledge, and to influence events in the material world through the exercise of magical power. The Scyther practitioner, who could be male or female, but was more commonly female in the surviving literary sources, was known as a Velva, a seeress, and the literary descriptions of Scyther practice that appear in various sagas and in the famous mythological poem Voluspa contain elements that are strikingly similar to the shamanic traditions documented by anthropologists in Siberia, Central Asia, and among the indigenous peoples of the Arctic regions, traditions that also feature trance states, spirit journeys, and the use of animal spirit helpers. In the Norse shamanic tradition, as reconstructed from the literary sources and the comparative evidence, animal spirits played a crucial role in the practitioner's ability to access the spirit world and navigate its dangers. The vulva's spiritual power was believed to be intimately connected to her relationship with various animal spirits. And among these animal spirits, wolves and ravens held a position of particular prominence, reflecting their importance in the broader mythological and spiritual framework of Norse culture.